Hi, folks. We're at a point that I've been praying for 57 years. God told me that He'd bring me out and He'd make my platform go ballistic when and only when we were at the point that everything was at a tipping point. We were in a collapse. Folks, we're there. We're absolutely there. And here's what we're going to be doing. All that study that I've got has all waited for this moment when we can tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and the truth can set you free. What we're going to be talking about today is the banker gangsters, the people who keep you in invisible chains of slavery using the monetary systems of the world. And this is part one of a two-part show. And please share this with everybody you know. There are millions of Americans who don't understand what I'm about to tell you, and they're being taken advantage of. And if you do even know anything about it, where the politicians say, well, it's the law. No, we can't look at it this way anymore. The people who pass the laws, by and large, are on the take. We're about to find out with what's happening in Venezuela that we have crooks in Washington that pass laws that are designed by intention to create laws that create illegal dictatorship. So what I'm going to be doing in this show and many others is saying, I don't care what the laws are. I'm going to tell you the straightforward, simple solutions that we could put into place to end this slavery system once and for all, so that every American can own a home, or at least almost all of us, and that we can all breathe because we're not in a financial vice. So please share that with everybody, and absolutely sure that you come back tomorrow and catch part two, because this is only the first half of a very, very important show. So let's go to the slides and let's get going. I bet you guys recognize that picture down on the bottom, don't you? That's from a pretty famous show. Well, that's really what it's all about right here. The rich get rich and the poor get poor. So this is about understanding how the bankers impoverish you. So to put it in a simple shell, you take your money to the bank and you give it to them and you walk away and you don't think a thing about it. The minute you do that, that money belongs to them. That's how they can freeze your credit, your accounts. That's why you have trouble if you make a big transaction. I had a transaction to make a while back that was $10,000, and I had a hard time getting my own money. So just understand, this is about the banker gangsters and how they use your money to their benefit. Let's go to the next slide, and we're going to break this down. There's a lot of detailed information in this. This is understanding the debt slavery system. So basically, listen to this. I'm going to read this first sentence. We, the people, owe the banking cartels interest on the first dollar ever created and every additional dollar ever created. So what it is they make money out of thin air, and then they attach it to a bond, and that bond is an interest vehicle, and that becomes the national debt that enslaves us. And we've known about it forever. It actually started in Great Britain, and they were so proud of what they had done. You know what they said? We don't have to have real slaves in chains. That's old-fashioned. We can control the people with money. And that's exactly what they've been doing to us ever since our nation was founded. And if you want to get an idea about how far back it goes, the people in power have known particularly forever. This next quote I'm going to read is from Henry Ford, and you all know who he is, right? So he invented basically the modern automobile. Here's what he has to say. It is well enough that the people of the nation do not understand our bankers and monetary system, for if they did, I believe there would be what? A revolution before the morning. Folks, that's what we need. We need now to stand up and understand that everything is in a tipping point, just like you're seeing riots happen and protests happen in Iran and in China and in Russia and all over the world. This is the time to topple the systems that enslave us. We have to stand up and we have to make a stand to get our freedom. And in this instance, is to get out from under the financial slavery system that has us all wondering, how am I going to pay my mortgage payment? Am I ever going to be able to buy a house? Can I afford my medicine this month? I mean, I got to go get a second job, or I got to get a third job because I can't survive. That system has to collapse. We have to get our freedom back. So let's go on down and we're going to see how they've inflicted this on us. Let's go to the next slide. Understanding the debt slavery system. So I've marked in black what I want you to really focus on, but please, I want you to go back and read these slides in total so you really understand. The dollar is nothing but a computer entry, just a computer entry. It creates a treasury bond that is a debt vehicle. And then that bond, that treasury bond, is the unconstitutional pledge to tax your labor. They tried to say the 16th Amendment made it possible for us to tax you, but no, it didn't. So everything that happens under the name of the Federal Reserve System is illegal and unconstitutional, and we need to force it. And who is their enforcement on? It's the IRS. And what is Mr. Donald Trump saying? We're going to go from the Internal Revenue Service to the External Revenue Service, and the IRS is going to go away. And instantly, what's that mean? Depending on your tax bracket, you might have 20 to 35% more money in your pocket. This is what we have to fight for, folks. We have to fight for our financial freedom. And with that, then comes our personal freedom. Because guess what? You might not have to work 2 jobs. You might be able to have time to spend with your wife and your kids and your neighbors. And you might have a real life instead of being what? An economic slave. So this is the basis of slavery without change that enslaves the masses of the population of the entire world. Let's go to the next slide. And here's what they do. It's very simple. They create at-will boom-bust cycles. It's so simple. It's a formula. It was Lindbergh who said of the 1929 crash, this was the first financial crash ever created, calculated like you would calculate a mathematical formula. So let's see what they do. They increase the money supply. Remember, they just print. Then they lower the interest rate, so there's plenty of cheap money out there. Then they target an investment. It's the stock market or it's the real estate market or whatever it is. And then they drive up the prices, and the balloon gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. People get FOMO. They're coming in. They're seeing, oh my God, look at all the money these people are making. And when they get all the suckers into it, they pop that bubble. And what do? They trigger the collapse. They dry up the credit, no credit. So basically, if you're out short, you're going to get killed. If you're over leveraged, you're going to get killed. They buy the assets at pennies on the dollar. Let's take the 1929 crash. We crashed in 33. When the dollar went down and the stock market went down until 1930, we were declared bankruptcy, and by that time stocks had dropped 90%. So that was all triggered because they dried up the credit. Then they buy those assets, those blue chip stocks, for 10 cents on the dollar, and they don't have to even own the corporations in order to own the stock market. All they have to do is buy enough that they can get on controlling interest on the board. So that's how our slave masters just keep going and going and going, like the ever-ready battery, driving us deeper and deeper and deeper into debt. Let's go to the next slide. And this is something that you really need to know. This was 1933. That's a typo. 1933, the Emergency Banking Act happened. And what was it? It was the Declaration of Bankruptcy of the United States of America. And within it, what did it say? I'm going to read this last half, starting where the yellow is. With the constitutional republic now dissolved, remember, we declared bankruptcy, the receivers of the bankruptcy have adopted a new form of government for the United States. This is the important part. This new form of government is known, listen to this, as a democracy, being a what? A socialist communist order under a new government for the United States of America. So when you send your kids to school, when you send them off to college, what they're being taught are the principles of socialism and the principles of a democracy, and they're not taught anything about the republic that we have, that is our legitimate form of government, which is a government of the people, by the people, for the people, and it has specific requirements. It means you have to be able to read. It means you need to be informed of the truth, not the lies. It means you need to be a moral population, and you need to be willing to cast your vote, not based upon entitlements, but based upon what you honestly think in your heart as an informed citizen is the best thing for the entire nation as a whole. When a nation functions in that fashion, it is prosperous. When it functions on casting votes for entitlements, Benjamin Franklin said, it is just a matter of time until they go broke. And what are we, folks? We are broke, and we are living in an entitlement society, and it has to stop. Let's go to the next slide. You put your money in the savings account, and look at the word savings account. And what did they used to say? A penny saved is a penny earned. Well, that used to be true, but not in the current banking system. No, sir, wee Bobby. You take that money and you put it in the bank, and I guarantee you, you lose, period. And I'm going to tell you why. The banks calculate interest rate So it is always, always less than the inflation rate, period. You've lost the second you put it in. Because of this, you are losing money, not making money. And why? Because interest goes up, and it's always going up faster than the interest rates you're getting. And so if you've got money in a bank for, say, 10 years, and you got a lot of it, when the 10 years is done, if you take into consideration the interest, the inflation that has happened, you'll find that you've never made a penny. In fact, your money is less valuable than it was when you put it in the bank. People don't understand that. Let's go on down to the next slide. And this one's fairly complicated, so I'm going to go kind of slow. I might even read the whole thing. How the bankers get rich using your money. Remember, it's your money, not their money. Here's an example. So they pay you, say, the rates vary, but let's say in this particular time, they're going to pay between 5% and 1% on your savings account. Now, they're going to loan that money out, and they're not going to loan it out at 2%. They're going to loan it out, if it's a personal loan, it's somewhere between 7 and 10%. If it's a credit card, they're going to loan it out at somewhere between 18 and 30%. So look at the spread. You're getting 0.5%, 2%, and they're getting from 7% to 30%. Hey, I'd like that deal. They're getting pretty darn rich. Then they charge you fees on top of that for using your money, maintenance fees, foreign transaction fees, activity fees, ATM fees, overdraft fees. And here's an example of an overdraft fee. Let's say you overdrew by just $10 lousy dollars. Standard charge is $35. That's a 350% profit. If that isn't usury, I don't know what the definition of usury would be. If that isn't criminal, I don't know what the definition of a criminal act would be. That's what they do to us, folks. Let's go on down to the next slide. And we're really, this one, I might ask you to take a screenshot of. This one is important. How banks create money out of thin air. Look at that picture. Money's just flying down from heaven, right? Here you go. Here's what they do. This is called the fractional banking system. You deposit $1,000. Well, they are supposed to keep 10% in the bank accounts, but I got a news flash. That's not necessarily happening right now, because when we had COVID, the government said, oh, this is a crisis and we can't afford to have a banking crisis. So you don't even have to keep 10%. We're not going to set any limits. You don't have to keep anything if you don't want. Well, my goodness, that's a really good plan. So let's look at what's going on. So you put $1,000 in, and let's say they do keep that 10%. That means they can loan out $900. And then they can get 10% of that 900, and on it goes until that $1,000 that you put in, they've loaned out multiple times, and now they're making that voracious profit of 7 to 30%, not on a single $900, but on thousands of dollars, thousands. So the 30%, so I'm going to read this next part, making, say, 7% to 30%, and not on your original $1,000 deposit, but on thousands of dollars. So you think that should be legal? That they can just, remember, all that money is just created out of nothing. So the Fed's busy creating money out of nothing, and then the banks are busy creating money out of nothing. And now I'm going to go to the SARA for a second, because I want a lot of people know what SARA is, but they don't believe it. So let me give you a little example that applies to this. So here's what happened. There was a Supreme Court case about that. And this is going to be important as we go forward. We start to fight for our rights. Here's what happened. The farmers were getting their farms taken away, and their tractors and their combines taken away. And so what happened is they got together and they filed a lawsuit, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And here's what they decided. They said, well, we, the farmers, we have skin in this game. We have something really tangible. We have our farms that we've worked all of our lives for. We have our livestock. We have our farm equipment. But the banks don't have anything. And it was based on what we just went over in the last two slides, because guess what? The banks created their money out of nothing. It was nothing but an entry in a ledger. And that's all it was. And so the Supreme Court said, well, if both parties don't have something tangible in the contract, it's not a legal contract. And that became the basis for what is the SARA, which is what is going to happen as we have this financial reset. I'm not going to talk about it today, but I just want you to see the connection and see the legality of what we're facing. We're going to get freedom, but we're going to have to stand up and fight for it. Let's go to the next slide. And my heart bleeds for the young people who cannot buy a house. So I think that the next show I'm going to do is going to address what's on this slide. There are millennials and Generation Zs that are out there that are trapped, that no matter how hard they work, they can't buy a house. Well, in the next show, we're going to talk about why they can't buy a house, and we're going to forget what the laws are. I don't care what the laws are. They're unconstitutional, they're illegal, they're usury, they're wrong. And we're going to propose to you solutions that don't take one iota of consideration for what the banker gangsters say. We're going to say, what does common sense say would be fair and honest and equitable? That's what we're going to talk about. So interest on the mortgages is front loaded. And oh, you know what? I never gave you any credentials regarding this show. So maybe I should stop a second and do that. So as you know, if you've been following me, I change jobs generally every 3 years, but I stopped for a long time when it got to real estate, and I was on the real estate market for 12 years. And I was a broker, and I eventually got my own company. And, you know, in that capacity, I'd worked with a lot of bankers and a lot of mortgage companies. So I know what I'm talking about from personal experience. So now let's get back into this slide. So when you make a loan, it's front loaded. All the interest comes up front. And so a 30-year loan, you don't reach the halfway point until year 26. And then you have basically that last 4 years, you pay off half of that loan. And that is an intentional trap. That is a trap to make you never actually really own a home. Because if you don't get that paid off by the time you retire, you're going to go into retirement with that chain of slavery wrapped around your ankle. So basically, that is a trap that you need to be cognizant of. Let's go on down. The average American moves how many times? 7 times. And what happens every time they move? Each time they move or refinance, because they come to you and say, oh, take all of that high cost credit card and put it on and refinance, and boy, your bills will be dropped. But guess what? There's another secret trap there. What that does is takes that amortization table and starts it over on month 1, and then all that front end loan interest is stacked on. And you might have been, let's say you were in year 27 or 28 and you were oblivious, you didn't know it. You just started the whole system over again. So I'm going to read this so we really make sure we got it. The average American moves 7 times. Each time they move or refinance, they are forced to get a completely new mortgage, and their amortization table starts over. So many people retire in debt slavery. Now, here's what we want to do. This is what we can do. There is no reason except pure greed that interest has to be front loaded, or why the amortization table has to be started over. So I'm going to be talking about, well, let's just do it right now. Here's what we need to do. We need to basically pass legislation that says, hey, interest is straight up. It's not front end loaded. And then we also need to say that, you know, when we buy a house, there's no reason in the world why we have to have a new mortgage. You know, because guess what is it that's securing that loan? You get your house approved, right? So the house is basically deemed to be credit worthy, and you've got your job and you've got your credit rating. That's what gives you the ability to get that loan. So all we have to do is just tweak the system in our favor instead of their favor. So what would it look like? It would look like you refinance or you buy a new home and you've got a mortgage, and let's say you're going to add $10,000 to that. So what you do is you just stay with that same mortgage company, and they just rewrite the contract. It stays at the same place on the amortization table, and voila, you pay your house off instead of being in this debt, in this trap. And the same thing applies if it's refinance. So the banker gangsters operate out of pure greed, and everything they do is a debt trap to enslave you. But we can stand up and look at what you said. This isn't a 2,000-page bill here. This is a sentence, and everything that we need to change when it comes down to common sense, and it isn't designed to basically profit some special interest group, can be written on a napkin, folks. Written on a napkin. Let's go on down to the next slide, and we're going to break everything down just a little bit for the illusion of home ownership. So stop and think. All you people out there, the young people, you don't own a home, but you want to own a home. When we get to next week's, we'll talk about how you can do that. But all of those who think you own a home are living in an illusion. Let me break it down for you. When we came to this country, we wanted certain freedoms: freedom of religion, freedom to carry a gun, freedom of speech. And we also wanted the ability to own a home, private ownership. And so we specifically set up our government based on Spanish land grants called the Odio ownership. And what that meant was, bam, the minute you pay your house off, that's it. Nobody can take it. You have perpetuity, ownership for perpetuity. And then along came the gangsters that says, well, that doesn't work for us. We've got to have a new system, and let's call it fee simple, and let's basically tie that to property taxes, so that now if you get behind and can't pay your property tax, bingo, they take your house. You get behind because they created an intentional financial collapse and you lost your job because they created the situation that caused you to lose your job. Bingo, they take your house. So with that overall explanation, now let's read everything in this slide line per line, because I really, really want you to get this. I want to make sure that I don't miss anything. The bankers keep you in what? Perpetual debt. Fall behind on your mortgage or taxes, and they take your home. And what happens when they do it? Say you owe $10,000 on a $500,000 house. My God, they can take your house for $10,000 debt. And let's say that that house sells for $400,000. Here's what can happen. This is just an example. Here's what they do. They take the $10,000 you owe, and they take the $390,000 balance. Oh, but you can get it back. But they don't tell you that. And most people just walk away, and they have no idea that they have just stolen $390,000 worth of equity. Now, it's complicated, and I have to say, I've never done it. You have to have a lawyer, but ignorance is bliss. They don't want you to know anything. When you went to school, whether it was high school or college, you never took a personal finance course that would teach you these kind of things and more. But if you're one of the elite, boy, when you go to those Ivy League schools, I'm telling you, they're teaching you how to be an entrepreneur. They're teaching you how to use money. They're teaching you the banking system. They're teaching you all the ways that you can get out of the taxes, and they're making you potentially very, very, very rich, while they're intentionally making us intentionally very, very, very poor. Let's go on down to the next slide. And I can just hear the people out there. You're going to disagree with what I'm going to say, but I don't care. I'm going to say it anyway because I believe it to be the truth. This is the poor, poor kids who can't buy a house, who went to college, who thought they were going to come out and get a good job. And I cannot tell you how many times I went into a restaurant and the person waiting on me when I got to chit-chatting with them had a college degree, and they're working in a restaurant, or they're delivering food, or they're doing whatever. Why? Because that's what they want. They want you to be in debt from the inception. So it'll be just like they say, you will own nothing and be happy. You will be a debt slave for the entirety of your life. So now I'm going to read what's on here because I really want to be precise in this particular presentation, because I want to wake people up. The plot to trap the Generation Zs and the millennials in perpetual debt. Here's what it is. They loan you some money, and then over time, as they've suckered you in, they raise the interest rates on the student loans. Over time, they've gone up and up and up. And then what do? There is a disconnect between the education system and viable employment. So they're not teaching. If you've got a liberal arts education, it's worthless these days. Basically, unless you're going to school to be an engineer or a doctor or something, that education is likely to end up with you waiting on tables. But they've loaned you a whole bunch of money, and they've got you in debt, and they want to keep you there because, remember, it's a trap. So what do? They make it so that bankruptcy won't even get you out of the student loan. So here you started your life and you went to school thinking you'd better yourself, and now you're in debt for the rest of your life. My God, it's just terrible. This creates a debt trap that takes away all hope. And so let's go to China for a second. What do? They have lying down people that they basically have given up on anything. They just say it's not even worth participating in the economic system because we can't get ahead. We're slaves. And American people are finally reaching that point. When you look around the world and you see the protests in other nations, and you look in Europe, and you look in China, and you look over in Iran, basically those things, same things are coming to America. We just haven't felt it the way it's being felt in other nations. So let's go on. So this creates perpetual debt. Uh, it doesn't have to be that way. In Europe, now this is important. So this is an alternative. Right now, what's happening is that college education, especially if it's a general arts education, is not worth the paper it's written on. You shouldn't be paying $1 to get that kind of education. So here's what they do over in Europe, what they do in Germany and elsewhere. In Europe, the government cooperates the schools with the schools. And here's what happens. The unions get together, the governments get together, the schools get together, and they have an educational program that's based on what we used to do a long, long time ago when things were made to work. It's called an apprenticeship program. And what do? They pay you while you're going to school to get your apprenticeship. Now, it's not what a journeyman makes, but you're making money. You're not going into debt. You're able to survive. And you come out, you have a trade. And they give you a certificate, just like a diploma, and you can take it anywhere. And how that education works is half the time it's in class, learning. Maybe you're learning to be an electrician or something. I mean, some of these are complicated, complex jobs. Maybe you're going to get a job in nanotechnology, which, oh, by the way, I mean, it only starts off at about $95,000 a year. So we look down our noses at blue collar people, but I'm telling you, they're probably making more than those college graduates that are working in the restaurant. So there's a system that we should be employing in the United States of America. Go back to what we knew worked before, go back to apprenticeship and have it paid for, and we come out with no debt and we walk right smack dab into a good job. I went to college and it took me 8 years because I didn't get debt. I basically paid for everything myself, but every once in a while I'd have to drop out of school because I didn't have the money. So 8 years later, I graduated and I'm off on my career, and I made good money in my career. But I had two friends. One became a plumber and one became an electrician. The time I got out of school with basically no money to speak of, but no debt, they already had a nice new car. They already had a nice house. They were already financially established because they had an 8-year head start on me. So if I would look at my earnings over my entire life and say that they got 8 years head start on me, they might actually come out better than I did. So let's go on down. Or I'm just telling you the truth, folks, the simple truth. Let's go to the next slide. And we're going to break this down. Look at that picture. The word is usury. So here's what happens. They charge you exorbitantly high revolving interest rates. And we shouldn't have revolving interest rates. We should have simple interest. And they shouldn't be able to charge us 20 or 30% because we had usury interest rates on all but 6 states. And what do those banker gangsters do? Well, they went out and incorporated in those 6 states, and then all of a sudden, those usury laws didn't apply. And the next thing you knew, you had credit cards with 20 or 30% interest rates, and bam, you're a debt slave. That's exactly what they've done. I'm going to read this lower part. Impact to the American people is this. Say you charge $1,000 at 30%, and you're only able to pay what? The minimum payment. What happens? Almost all of your payment goes to cover interest. So you look at these people that are poor, and they know they want to go after those, and we'll get to them in a minute. What happens is they're going to make that minimum payment, and almost nothing goes to principal. So that debt that they have that they thought they were going to get out of in a year or 2 years might go on for 5 years or 10 years or even 20 years. And then the next thing you know, you're saying, I can't get out, and you have to go into a debt service that's going to intercede on your part to create just a little bitty bit of justice for you. So that's the debt trap that keeps people in perpetual debt. Let's go on down, and here's your target market for the banker gangsters. If you're rich, hey, you get a special deal. You get lower interest rates. You get premier treatment. But if you're poor, they're sending you something in the mail every single solitary week, offering you a credit card because they know that you're going to pay the minimum payment. So if you're a student, you're not only suckered in because you're going to borrow money, but you might be having to go into debt and use your credit card. So they got a double whammy on you. And if you're elderly and you're fixed on a fixed income, they know you're probably not going to pay that off at the end of each month. And so they know they want you. And if you're a single mom, they know they got you. So they go after, like any predator, like a lion in the jungle going after prey. They go after the students, after the elderly, after the poor people, and after the people with health issues, and after the moms that have no fathers. I mean, the single moms. Basically, that's their gravy train. They abuse these people and hold them in absolute despair the entirety of their lives. Let's go on down. And there's another category. Here we go. Let's go to the next slide. And this is the wonderful loan sharks. So basically what they do is you're in a situation, you're in a bit of crunch, and you can't get that 7% loan at the bank on a personal loan. You have no collateral, and so you go to a payday loan. Oh boy, that interest rate's going to be high. And now look at this. You're basically maybe somebody who's living in the United States, but you're from another country, and you're sending money regularly back to your relatives back in another country. Well, if it's not a whole lot of money, the fees that you pay become exorbitant relative to the amount of money you're spending. But guess what? We're going to a new economic system, and we're going to get out from under SWIFT, and we're going to incorporate XRP as the rails. And now that money that you send is going to cost you a few cents instead of maybe 10 or 20 or 30% of what you're sending. So we're getting rid of another trap. Those shark's teeth aren't going to be chasing you through the water anymore. Let's go on down to the next slide. I just can't overemphasize, these are monsters, absolute monsters. So now we're talking about the credit card industry. And the credit card industry, remember, can charge you up to 30%. And how did they get the ability to do that? Because they incorporated in the 6 states that didn't have usury. So we need to go back and reverse that. Our Bible tells us that we shouldn't have usury, and it tells us that the preferable situation is that you neither borrow nor loan. But if you got to be in one place or another, you want to be the loaner, not the borrower. So here we go. What are they focusing on? The low-income people, the senior citizens, the single moms, the students. They become the credit card debt slaves who have no hope, who are the lay-down people in China, who are the same people who are getting in that situation here in the United States of America. Now, we're going to go to the next slide. I'm going to tell you about my new book. But please, this is just half of this presentation. You need to hear the second half, and I hope it enrages you. We need to stand up, and we need to stand for our rights, and we need to get these laws changed. And as we find out about our corrupt politicians and our elections have been stolen, I mean, this is the moment when we can do that. So for those of you who followed me, you know I've got a book out already. It's called Liberty Crusade, Fighting Liberty Crusade, The Fight to Slay the Free World. This book is tentatively going to be released for pre-sale on February the 1st and for general sale on March the 1st. February 15th, and then general sale on March the 1st. It's called, guess what? Look at that name, Restoring the Republic, getting our freedom back, getting out of the debt trap, correcting all the legal unright laws that basically are used to enslave us, getting our republic back, recognizing that democracy is nothing but slavery and communism, and getting back into the system that our founding fathers intended for us to have, and getting back into the system that God ordained. And it's a system based on commodities, which is what? Based on gold and silver. And God says, the gold and silver are mine. And he says, the cattle on 1,000 hills are mine. So what's going to happen is capitalism's going to fall. Communism is going to fall. Don't fear it. It has to happen. And then we're going to go to God's economic system that's based on commodities that cannot be manipulated, cannot be controlled. And then we will have a fair economic system, and people will be able to live and be able to have time to spend with their family and be able to pursue spiritual development. I'm telling you, don't fear what's coming. It has to come. We have to break the system to take the money away from the global financial elite. And then and only then will we have freedom, prosperity, and spirituality will break out all over the world. So thank you for watching. Please come back. Please subscribe. Please, this is very vital information that every American needs to know. See you tomorrow.